Hi everyone, my name is Shiv Gaglani and I'm the co-founder of Osmosis, which I started when I was a medical student. I'd like to thank you for joining me on the short webinar, hopefully only about 20 to 25 minutes, in which we can go through how you as normally a second year medical student can balance studying for your classes, which typically ramp up in the expectations, um, balance that while studying for board exams, because ultimately, obviously, everyone cares about their board exam scores, since that's one of the first things residency program directors look at when you go into the match. And so my qualifications, I'm going to share some slides here as to why I'm talking to you about this. So in terms of my background, I'm on the editorial board of Medscape Med Students. I started medical school at Johns Hopkins, where I'm currently still a medical student on leave as I grow Osmosis. I received my MBA from Harvard Business School and, of course, co-founded Osmosis with my friend, Ryan, who was my anatomy team-based learning partner. And so ultimately, the main problem that Ryan and I faced when we were medical students was we quickly realized that medical education consists of three specific parts. There's often your classwork, right? The things that typically at most schools are your first and second year of med school. And this applies for nursing students, PA students, and other health profession students too. So the things that your professors give you, the PowerPoints, the problem-based learning sessions, every few weeks you have exams that test you on that material. At some schools you may have cumulative exams, which I know probably are painful, but they're actually better if your school does that, because that helps you long-term in terms of retaining information. So there's the classwork, because ultimately if you don't pass those courses like microbiology, you won't be able to even go to second year or third year and move on in your medical experience. So you have to prioritize your classes. But then as you start nearing your board exam dates, so the step 1, the COMLEX level 1, the NCLEX, etc., that starts becoming more of a looming subject, right? Where you care really about, maybe you even start skipping classes as you start studying for boards, dedicated period. A lot of schools give you a couple of weeks off just to study for these exams. And I think that's great, except it's sort of redundant, because ideally, in an ideal setup, you just go from your classes right to boards. However, in practice, you often will forget the things you learn in your first year of school by the time you're ready to take boards. And actually, many of the schools that Osmosis works with, like University of Michigan, are leading the way in having students take their boards after third year. If your school does this, that's probably a good thing, because you're able to get clinical experience and those memory anchors that come from meeting patients with conditions that'll ultimately help you on the board exams, but more importantly with patient care. But at a lot of schools, it's still between your second and third year where you take your board exams, and that's how it still is at Johns Hopkins. And then the clinical experience, the things that you ultimately need to know to be a good physician or clinician of some sort. In an ideal world, there'd be 100% overlap between what you're learning in each of these three stages. But in practice, as many of you know, there's things that you're taught in class that aren't so-called high yield, right? There are things that go too in depth into a certain subject based on your professor's research experience, for example. I distinctly remember one of our second year lectures at Johns Hopkins was from Carol Greider, who is an amazing researcher. She won a Nobel Prize because she co-discovered telomeres. And so she gave us a very, very in-depth lecture on telomeres, which barely show up on the boards. And so a lot of students traditionally had skipped that class because while it was tested on the course exam, it wasn't that important for the boards. And that was sort of a shame. Ultimately, it'd be better if we could align what you're learning in classes with the boards and vice versa. Another example, though, are the things that will be covered in clinical experience, things like Zika virus, which you ultimately need to know, especially if you're in an OB or GYN clerkship, and when your patients ask you about Zika and travel, for example. But ultimately, Zika doesn't really show up on the boards. So because of this non-overlap, you are often pulled into many different directions, and you have to allocate your day in a much more sensible way the closer you get to your board exams, so that you aren't spending all your time on your classwork, because oftentimes the classwork's just pass fail or not high yield, but you also aren't just skipping all your classes and just studying for the boards, because then why are you even going to school, essentially? And so Ryan and I essentially set out to solve this problem and to build a system, to build a process. And you don't have to use Osmosis to do this. I'm going to go through how people can do this on Osmosis, but clearly many of the things that I'm going to share with you, you can just take apart into your own platforms or whatever you're deciding to use. And we wanted to build a process and system that would bridge the gap between all three of these curricula so that when you transition from classes to boards, it's more painless and you score higher, or you score the same but with less stress. And then when you transition from boards to clinical experience, you actually retain that information, you can apply it on the wards, etc. So just going into how to start approaching this as a person who has the board exams coming up in, say, the next 6 to 12 months, which is, I think most of the viewers indicated that that's probably the time frame of when they would be taking these exams. So we have a lot of resources to help you figure out how to learn better, how to retain that stuff that you learned first year or in the first few months of second year by the time you hit the boards or the wards. I highly recommend, if you haven't done this already, it's sort of become mainstream at this point. There's tools that do spaced repetition, Anki, Firecracker, Memorang, and of course Osmosis do spaced repetition, and we've made a video on what spaced repetition is. This will save you a lot of time during your dedicated study period. If you don't currently use spaced repetition, you've got to start using spaced repetition. That's a core thing I want to get across. Because, forget what happened first year. Maybe you've forgotten a lot of that already. But moving forward, as you start entering your courses this semester in your second year, cardiovascular pathophysiology or renal pathophysiology, whatever you're learning, you've got to start using spaced repetition, because that'll save you a lot of stress when you get to your dedicated board studying, because 6 months from now, you'll retain that, what is Addison disease, because you have those cards, those flashcards that come to you via spaced repetition. So definitely go to Osmosis, watch this video in spaced repetition. And it's not just a matter of reviewing flashcards. What we want you to get in the habit of is also testing yourself on things beyond flashcards. So that's why we have this testing effect video that goes into how you can become a more effective learner. So we've produced a lot of these videos, and actually all the people who are watching this webinar, you'll get a link soon with our newly released How to Study in Medical School guide. It's free for anyone who just creates an account. And of course, it'll go first to the people who are watching this video. And we go through the importance of spaced repetition and interleaving, or how to change your behavior so that you ultimately are able to be more effective with your time as a clinical student. So that's something to look forward to very soon. But so, that's a high level. Start incorporating some of these evidence-based techniques, because while there may be a learning curve to them starting out, they will ultimately save you a lot of time downstream and a lot of pain. So again, first thing, incorporate spaced rep testing effect every day as you're going through school, or at least at a minimum every week. So one of the core problems that we faced in medical school was the fact that, again, we had all these lectures and PowerPoint slides and course documents coming at us, and we weren't sure how much time do we spend on this stuff to pass our class exams versus, just in first aid studying for the boards. And so we designed a system that makes this a little easier for you. But again, if you don't use Osmosis, that's totally fine. I'm just going to demo it within Osmosis. If you do use Osmosis, this is how you do it. So here's an example where on August 1st, the students in this workspace, so this is a private workspace, only students who belong to this group can see this, where on August 1st, they were learning at 8 a.m. about the adrenal gland disorders. And so that's the PowerPoint right here. And if you click on the PowerPoint, it actually loads it right in the system. And so whether you're using OneNote or Notability or PowerPoint, you have this PowerPoint up. Whether in class or you're looking at this at 2x speed, watching it at home in your pajamas, you have this PowerPoint up. So the question is, what do I do with this PowerPoint to make sure that I'm most effectively using my time for basically killing two birds with one stone, making sure that I'm going to pass this endocrine class that my school is offering me, as well as retaining the high yield information for the board exams, 6 to 9 months from now. And so here's an example slide where we're learning about the adrenal glands and the different zones, as well as what they secrete. So for example, the zona fasciculata secretes glucocorticoid. This is obviously an important thing to know, especially what does cortisol do. And so it's at this point where, as you're going through your slides, if you don't know what certain terms are, it's important to have your first aid book with you and start annotating as you go through it. So certainly, looking up the index is an important thing to do. If you, as you're going through the PowerPoints, you can be annotating your first aid book with notes that you're taking, especially notes that your professor says are really important to know. And so one way we make this easier for you is we pull out some of the key terms like glucocorticoid here. If you notice, I'm hovering over the term glucocorticoid, and if I just click on it, it'll actually pull up a quick reference of a summary of what GCs are, a video from a partner where you can go through their pharmacology. Many of you use tools like Picmonic and Sketchy, and we hyperlink directly to them. So if you were to click on Picmonic, it'll take you right to the glucocorticoid Picmonic. Or if you click on Sketchy and you're logged in, it'll take you right into the Sketchy farm for glucocorticoids. And so it's a great way to quickly reference these two resources, and we offer discounts on both to our Prime members, as well as first aid. So you've bought either the 2017 version or maybe the 2015 or 2016 version, and here you can see the index of first aid right there and where glucocorticoid shows up. So as you're learning about adrenal steroids and glucocorticoids, go to page 318, and boom, you can start annotating that. You can also, it's not enough to just annotate. So this first step is taking notes, right? Is first understanding what is a glucocorticoid in the adrenal gland context and taking notes on this. And you can, again, you can, if you'd like to annotate, you can do that. You can highlight. But generally, we want to promote more active learning strategies because, just retyping notes and annotating and highlighting is very passive. It's sort of like just listening to your professor and then just, you feel like you're doing work, but you aren't really learning as much. And there's a lot of research that backs that up. And again, we mentioned some of that research in the books and the videos we've produced on learning science. But what's more important is quizzing yourself, right? So that's the testing effect, and then adding those quizzes to your spaced repetition queue. So we make this pretty easy for you. So some of you may know Brosencephalon. It's a very popular Anki deck. We've collaborated with Brosencephalon. We did a webinar with them on how to write flashcards that we're happy to share too. We also are talking to Zanki, who some of you may know the Zanki deck, and you can import both decks into Osmosis just like you could into Anki. So Osmosis worked with Brosencephalon, improved that deck, made it way better, more closely related to first aid later versions. And what you see here is the logo, where based on what's presented on this slide, so again, your course material, we've sandwiched 5 flashcards right next to it that are high yield, right? Things that came from first aid, essentially, things that test you on the first aid facts. So instead of just reading first aid or annotating on first aid, let's just quiz yourself. So here's where, it'll say the blank is the layer of the adrenal cortex that produces mineralocorticoids. And you can mouse over, it's the zona glomerulosa. And that's boom right there. And that was done automatically. So Osmosis, through its algorithms, just like Amazon does it, where Amazon says customers who bought this also bought that, Osmosis does the same thing. So students who are learning about this also care to learn about these Bohr-tested facts. And once you quiz yourself, you want to flag it for spaced rep and make it pretty easy on yourself. So this will come to your spaced rep queue the next day. And boom, within a few minutes, I can get through 5 first aid type flashcards that are relevant to what I'm learning in class. So that's what I'm talking about with quick killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Oftentimes, though, we won't be able to find the right flashcards for you because your professor may be teaching not high yield stuff, or the slide doesn't have text that we can extract and recommend content on. And this is where you and some study buddies can really help each other out by dividing and conquering. So here you see 2 other icons, and these are students who've created flashcards on this content. So every time you see one of these, like an icon or initials, these are students who've created flashcards for the material here. And instead of having to create your own flashcard, you can create it all for one lecture. Your friend can create it for the next problem-based learning session. And in that way, you can collaborate to make sure you have flashcards, active learning tools for every single thing you're learning. And if you don't see if you see a slide that doesn't have flashcards on it, you can just simply click create flashcard or create question, and we give you some best practices on how to create these flashcards. So we want you to start, especially now that you're into second year and you're getting close to the boards, to invest a little more time up front into really understanding and retaining this information through active learning principles, through quizzing yourself, through writing flashcards and questions, and then basically, be able to make sure you're preparing for the boards as you're preparing for these classes. Okay, so that's what happens when you click into a document. And so again, if you're using PowerPoint or OneNote, same deal. Just make sure that you have Anki up and you're writing flashcards in Anki as you're using PowerPoint. We've tried simplifying things for you by making it just all right in front of you. Here's another example of how we do that. So we have this pretty spiffy and unique tool called Analyze Text that's based on machine learning and natural language processing. So basically, any of the text that we can extract from this lecture slides or problem-based learning session from your classes, if you click Analyze Text, we'll tell you under this lecture analysis tool how many times in this document Cushing syndrome showed up. It came out 24 times. Pheochromocytoma showed up 13 times. Addison disease 7 times. And so for each of these terms, and there's pathology, there's physiology, there's pharmacology, for each of these terms, you can just simply click on the term. You can see if there's a video we have associated with the term, and you can see your progress on each of these in terms of the flashcards on each of these terms. And so for Addison disease, let me just click on that. Again, it'll pull up this concept card. And in this case, there's actually a really great osmosis video. It's only 12 minutes, and you can, of course, watch it in 2x, as many of us like to do.
Primary adrenal insufficiency, also known as Addison's disease, is to stimulate the proton ATPase. Genesis is the formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources.
Well-animated video that goes through the high-yield points, right? We look at up-to-date, pathoma, first aid, and make sure we're covering all those high-yield points. So this is something that's really great to watch before your lecture. So in general, YouTubing and finding or osmosing and finding videos that could help you really get more out of your lectures is important. I can't tell you how many lectures I sat in when I was in med school where it just kind of went in through one ear, out the other, because I wasn't actively trying to learn. However, whenever I read the book, I looked at first aid, or I watched a video before going to the lecture, I would get a lot more out of it. So instead of trying to hang on to every single word your professor's saying, you'd already understand the stuff, and then when your professor's talking, you can just simply create flashcards or questions or quiz yourself as they're saying things. It's a lot more effective way to start doing better in classes and on the board exams. I also love these patient experience videos. These are actually my favorite thing on Osmosis, where what we realized was this is the original memory anchor, right? So the best memory anchor are patients who talk about their experience with the condition, because that's ultimately, you'll have this face. It'll make you more engaged, because this is ultimately why you decided to go to health profession school, is because of these patients. And so to me, it's even more effective than, again, we love Picmonic and Sketchy, but I find the patient videos more effective because they're real people and they're very memorable. So this is a great thing to watch after you've learned about Addison disease, to put everything into context. And again, each one of these things will take a little while longer for you to do, but up front, if you spend 1 hour learning about Addison disease instead of 10 minutes, that means later on you can spend a lot less time reviewing Addison because you've really got it. Again, Picmonic, CelebDX, First Aid, these are important things to take a look at if you want more memory anchors. Another core thing is just flashcards. As we've said, flashcards, spaced rep, spaced rep. So we have 9 flashcards on Addison disease, and you can just kind of go through the list and add them all to your review feed. And then one of the coolest features that I really love, and that a lot of students use, is basically, there are a lot of times I was sitting in lecture or in problem-based learning where I was like, I know we learned about sickle cell in the past. Like, this is the 6th time I'm learning about the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, but I keep forgetting it. And so what this does is it shows you every single time in your workspace where Addison disease showed up. So on March 31st, it showed up under autoimmune diseases here, type 4 hypersensitivity reaction. And then it showed up again under Physio 2 renal review on August 11th. So this is a really cool way to visualize when these terms show up in your own curriculum and jog your memory, because ultimately, you spent an hour back then learning about, on March 7th, learning about Addison disease and MCB, and now you're reviewing it. So if you can just simply click right back there, it'll just be a great way to jog your memory, maybe answer some flashcards based on the document here. We're just trying to bring you a lot of efficiencies. And as you feel good about this stuff, we definitely want you to quiz yourself. You can quiz yourself on just the condition or on the entire pathology section. And then as you, again, feel good about these topics, just check them off. And in this way, this is a great way to prepare for and review lectures and case-based discussions And again, even if you don't use Osmosis, we highly recommend that you take the time to open up First Aid, to annotate it, quiz yourself using an Anki deck, your friend's Anki deck, Brosencephalon, or Osmosis, or something else you use, and just make sure that you're actually quizzing yourself as you go through this stuff. Then there's certainly a lot of other features and things you can do with this, but I'm going to transition here to what one of our most popular features is for people who are getting closer and closer to board exam prep. Some students do this starting the first day of M2, even if they have a whole year until they take step 1. I kind of recommend doing it only between 3 to 6 months out of your step exam date. But essentially what I'm talking about is you can create a step schedule. So if I go to Add Tools and go to Step 1 Schedule and turn that on, it pops up here. And I'll just create a new one to show you what that process is. So you can kind of go through this yourself, but I'm just going to kind of do a guided walkthrough. The whole point of this is that what we realized, even when we were medical students, our classmates were buying a lot of different resources, right? You buy 2 or 3 question banks, you buy flashcard tools, you buy video libraries. You have so many resources that it's hard to know what you should be focusing on when. When should I watch that sketchy video, or when should I review Pathoma? And so we built this tool to help you answer those questions, to make your life a lot easier. And so say again, I'm starting my M2 year, and I have my step 1 date on March 15th, 2018, right? So I got a little time. I'm going to say next. It asks you, do you want to start reviewing today or start later? Let's just say today. I'm a gunner. I want to do it. So there's 226 days, which makes me feel comfortable. Or if you're more neurotic, maybe it makes you feel a little less comfortable. Which version of First Aid do you plan on using? Right now, obviously 2018 hasn't been released, so we say 2017 if you have that. Are you still in classes? Yeah, I'm still in classes because I'm an M2. When do the classes end? Let's just say they end 6 weeks out. So they end February 1st, so I have 6 weeks of dedicated time. Are there any specific days of the week that you'd like to leave unscheduled? Some people want to leave Sundays off or Saturdays off for religious purposes. I'll say no. Do you want to study on weekends as well as weekdays? Well, I have a life, so I want to have the weekends. Do you want to take weekends off during your pre-dedicated and dedicated study period? I'll say, in the 6 weeks of dedicated study period, I don't want to take weekends off. So let's just say only during the pre-dedicated period. And then, if there's a spring break or a wedding or a vacation coming up, do you have any weeks you'd like to leave unscheduled? I'll just say no for now. UWorld, obviously the gold standard question bank. There's 2,400 questions. And we recommend that you do it twice, but you can also decide to do it once or only repeat incorrect items. And then what days do you want to take the full-length practice exams? I like to take my practice exams on weekends. And then here is the summary of what we're going to do. So in your pre-dedicated period, which is essentially your classes, right? I'm still taking block-based exams during this time. You're going to do 1 pass over First Aid, and you can also choose other resources you want to get through. And then during your dedicated period, you have 42 days. You'll take 4 full-length practice exams. And again, you can change these details after the schedule is built. So I'll generate the schedule. It'll take maybe a few seconds. And while it's doing that, here's the study plan. So it's the start date, as I said today. Dedicated starts February 1st and the exam date is March 15th. On the right, I can set different topics, different resources. So I'm using First Aid. Let's just say, I like Picmonic and not Sketchy. I'm going to uncheck that, or vice versa, right? So you can decide which of these resources you want to use. And it'll say today on August 1st, let's start you off with 15 UWorld questions. Do your first pass. You can also add custom goals for other resources. We don't want you to buy tons of different resources, because that's part of the point of Osmosis, to be your aggregator, so that we provide you videos, questions, flashcards, the actual platform to do these things. So we want you to save money in the process of just consolidating your time and resources, and having less switching costs. There's a lot to be said about just being focused on the resources you have and not getting overloaded. But these are some of the core ones we recommend. And so we say specifically which pages of First Aid to read today. Again, this is just Tuesday, August 1st. It's very accomplishable. Just read 5 pages, sorry, 6 pages, and check it off when you're done. If you like Picmonic, we link you right to the Picmonics that are relevant that you should take a look at. And then you can also start doing Osmosis flashcards that quiz you on biochem. And then you can move to the next day and the next day after that. And you can kind of see what's next. Metabolism will be next after the first week. If you want to edit this timeline, this is what I recommend for those of you who want to get into this interface sooner than later. You know, again, as I said, 3 to 6 months out, I think this is a great interface. But if you're more than a year out, I think you should just keep using the workspace that I showed you right here, where you're actually going through your classes. But here is where I think it's a good idea, because you can say you're doing cardio right now. You're starting off with cardio. You can just drag this up to the first bit. So say cardio is the month of August. I'm dragging it up, and I'm going to say I want this to align with the whole month of August. And obviously there's, you know, this means that I have to get these days back because I'm spending a whole 30 days on cardio. But if I do that, whoops, I don't have any, sorry, I have to actually unschedule some days. So let me just, for the ease of use, just get it back to what I was recommending, 12 days. So it'll start me off with cardiology, and that means that I can go through my board studying here while simultaneously going through my classes. So for example, we'll start you off with our osmosis video on blood flow and cardiac output. And then you can see our 4 videos on mitral valve, pulmonary valve, aortic valve, and tricuspid valve disease. And so, you know, hopefully these align with what you're learning in class, but this is a really solid way to be able to simultaneously prepare for classes and boards using a study schedule that also lets you integrate, you know, Picmonics and Pathoma and Sketchy and First Aid at the same time. Great, so those are the two key ways you can use this tool and processes you can use to make sure you're going through classwork and board exams at the same time. There's a lot of other things you can do. For example, when you're in cardiology, you can just go to the library, click on cardiovascular, look specifically at the videos, the step 1 questions. Obviously, we want you quizzing yourself on questions and seeing your progress. You can look at the resource index, where it'll lay out all the patho, physio, and pharmacology for all these different systems, and you can check them off as you feel good that you've covered them. Note that a lot of schools try their best to cover all these things, but many schools won't be able to, right? There's only so many hours in a day that faculty can teach you. And so as you're going through things and feel comfortable, it is a good habit to start checking things off, because you may realize that your school taught you about tricuspid insufficiency and valve stenosis, but not atresia. So you may just want to click on that and start learning about atresia yourself, and doing the flashcards available for that, looking at on page 269 of First Aid, etc. So there's a lot of different things you can do clicking around, but right after this webinar is over, which will be in a minute or two, we'll send you out this How to Study in Med School PDF. And I also recommend you check out Dr. Desai, who's our Chief Medical Officer, his video called 5 Steps to Acing the USMLE Step 1. Many of the lessons are applicable to COMLEX. And it's been seen over 40,000 times and helped a lot of students score pretty well on these board exams, as well as decrease their stress and really organize their studying. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your kind attention and time. Obviously, you know, we really appreciate those of you who give us feedback day in, day out, who are watching this, who are sharing this with your classmates. Ultimately, we want you to be the best physician, and we think that studying for STEP helps you consolidate a lot of what you've learned over your first few years of school. But don't forget why you've gone through this process, why you're going through med school or nursing school or whatever profession you're going into, because it's easy to lose sight as you get closer to boards on why you're doing what you're doing. So we hope that we can help keep you organized, make you less stressed, so that you can keep doing what, you know, keep seeing patients and doing the things that you want to do, the reason you chose this career for yourself. So anyways, good luck with it, and feel free to touch base with us. You can just reach me at shiv, S-H-I-V, @osmosis.org, or hi@osmosis.org, or if you're logged in to Osmosis, just use this chat button on the bottom right. But thanks again, and best of luck with second year for most of you. Take care.